He came home that night with her perfume on his collar and a smile Naya hadn't seen in 2 years, except in photographs she was never supposed to find. Kwon Tae-jun didn't even bother to shower first. He walked through the front door of their Hanam-dong mansion like a man who had already decided the war was over, like Nia was furniture he'd stopped noticing, like 18 months of lying to her face had become so effortless it no longer required any effort at all. He set his keys on the entry table, loosened his tie, and called out her name the way you call out to an empty house. Not expecting an answer, just filling silence out of habit. Nia was standing at the top of the grand staircase. She didn't say a word. And if you were watching from the doorway, you might have thought she was simply waiting for him, that she hadn't noticed, that she would smile and ask if he'd eaten. That's what he thought too. He was wrong. If you've ever loved someone so completely that their betrayal didn't just break your heart, it broke your entire understanding of yourself, then stay with this story. Subscribe to this channel and follow it all the way to the end, because what this woman did next will change how you think about dignity, about silence, and about what it truly means to walk away. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning it all collapsed for real began the way most ordinary catastrophes do. Quietly, without warning, in the middle of something mundane. Nia Caldwell was sorting through a stack of unopened mail at the kitchen counter, still in her pajamas, coffee cooling beside her because she kept forgetting to drink it. She was 34 years old, 5 years into a marriage she had fought hard to believe in, and tired in the specific way that only comes from carrying too much for too long without admitting how heavy it had become. She wasn't looking for anything. She found it anyway. The envelope was slim, unmarked, slid underneath a catalog for home furnishings as if someone had placed it there deliberately, which, as she would later learn, they had. Inside was a single photograph printed on standard paper, the kind you'd pull from a home printer. Tae-jun, in a hotel elevator. His hand pressed against the small of a woman's back, his mouth close to her ear, and even in the grainy image, Nia could read the particular shape of his face in that moment. Relaxed, present, warm. The expression she had spent years trying to draw back out of him and had eventually stopped chasing. The woman in the photograph was smiling. Nia set it down on the counter. She picked up her coffee. She took one sip, realized it had gone cold, and poured it down the sink. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the lower cabinets, because her legs had decided that standing was no longer an option, and she stayed there for a very long time without making a single sound. That was the last time Nia Caldwell cried about Kwon Tae-jun inside their shared home. She cried hard and she cried ugly, the kind of crying that doesn't look like anything you've seen in movies, the kind that racks your whole body and leaves you raw and demolished. And when it was finished, something had shifted. Not healed, not resolved, just shifted. The woman who got up off that kitchen floor was not the same woman who had gone down. Well, to understand why Nia stayed as long as she did, you have to understand who she was before Seoul. She grew up in Chicago's South Side in a household held together by her mother's discipline and her grandmother's stubbornness. She was the kind of child who asked too many questions and read books with a flashlight under her covers. She studied art history because everyone told her it wasn't practical, and she threw herself into conservation work because she found it beautiful. The idea that damaged things could be preserved, that something broken by time or neglect or violence could be stabilized, protected, returned to the world in a form that honored what it had been. She was brilliant at her job. She was less brilliant at reading the people around her, not because she was naive. Nia had too much of her grandmother's sharpness for that, but because she had a tendency to focus so intensely on what something could become that she sometimes failed to examine what it currently was. That tendency is how she fell in love with Kwon Tae-jun. She met him at an exhibition preview in Seoul's Insadong district, 8 years before the photograph on her kitchen counter. She was on a 6-month conservation fellowship, cataloging a collection of late Joseon-era ink paintings for an international gallery. He was there because the gallery owner owed him money, and paying it back with access to cultural events was the kind of arrangement the Baiko Syndicate regularly accepted. She didn't know any of that at the time. What she knew was that a man in an immaculate black suit was looking at a damaged landscape scroll with what appeared to be genuine attention, and when she approached to ask if he had questions about the restoration work, he turned and looked at her with dark eyes that seemed almost startled, as if he hadn't expected to be addressed directly, as if he wasn't accustomed to people treating him like he might have a question worth answering. "Is it better to preserve something broken?" he asked, "or repair it so completely that you can't tell it was ever damaged?" She told him that was the wrong question, that preservation and repair weren't opposites, that the goal was always to understand what the damage had done to the work's integrity before deciding what to do next. He looked at her for a long moment. "Most people here just tell me what they think I want to hear," he said. "I'm not from here," she said. He smiled. It was a rare thing, she would learn later, that unguarded smile. It appeared in precisely 3 situations. In the first few months of their courtship, on the afternoon of their wedding, and occasionally in the early years when he forgot himself long enough to be simply a man rather than the head of Seoul's most feared criminal organization. After a while, it stopped appearing at all. But on that first night, it arrived full and undefended, and Nia Caldwell, who was smart enough to have avoided most of the world's obvious dangers, did not protect herself from it. They dated for 14 months before he told her the full truth about the Baeko syndicate. By then, she was already in love with him, which was, she recognized later, probably not accidental on his part. He sat across from her at a small restaurant near the Han River, his hands flat on the table, and explained, without euphemism, without softening, exactly what he was. What the syndicate did, what his role in it meant, what remaining in his life would require her to accept. Most women would have walked. Nia asked him questions for 2 hours. She asked about his exit strategy. She asked how many people in his legitimate businesses knew the full picture. She asked whether his mother was involved and whether the violence was occasional or structural. She asked what he actually wanted his life to look like in 10 years. He had never been asked any of those questions. He answered all of them. When she finally went quiet, he told her she could take time to think, that he would understand completely if this was the point where she left. "I'm not leaving," she said. "But I'm also not pretending. If this is what your life is, then I'm in your life, not your cover story. Understand the difference." He told her he understood, and for several years, he actually did. The first miscarriage happened in year 2 of their marriage, 11 weeks in. Tae-jun was in the room when the doctor delivered the news. And whatever else he was, whatever his name meant in Seoul's criminal geography, in that room he was just a man sitting next to a woman he loved, absorbing an impact that neither of them had any framework for. He held her hand for 3 hours afterward and didn't say anything, which was exactly right, which was, in fact, one of the few times in their marriage that he gave her precisely what she needed without being asked. The second miscarriage arrived 14 months later, further along, harder. They painted the nursery afterward anyway. Nia's idea. Not in denial, but in defiance of it, as a statement that those children had existed, that the room had been prepared for them, that their absence didn't erase the intention. Tae-jun painted alongside her for an entire Saturday, still in his dress shirt because they hadn't thought to bring old clothes, rolling pale yellow over white walls while a playlist of old American R&B moved through a small Bluetooth speaker. She thought they were unbreakable. The evidence was substantial. She was wrong about that too. The change didn't happen in a single moment. It happened the way most erosion does, imperceptibly at first, then all at once you looked back and traced the progression. Tae-jun started staying later at what he called meetings. His phone developed a new habit of turning face down whenever he set it on a surface near her. His mother, Kwon Tae-jun, a composed and relentlessly calculated woman who had tolerated Nia's presence while maintaining a continuous low-level campaign against her influence, began making observations about the Kwon bloodline with increasing frequency and decreasing subtlety. "A family requires continuity," she told Nia at a dinner 3 years into the marriage, loudly enough for 3 other women at the table to hear. "Your situation is unfortunate, of course, but the bloodline does not pause for misfortune." Tae-jun, sitting at the head of the table, said nothing. Nia smiled and changed the subject. In the car afterward, she asked him to address what his mother had said. He told her she was overreacting. She asked him once more, clearly, without anger. He said his mother was old-fashioned and meant nothing by it. Nia understood then that she was going to have to protect herself, not from Hyeran, but from her own optimism about Tae-jun's willingness to stand between her and his family. She adjusted accordingly. Yoon Sira entered their world formally about 18 months before the photograph in the envelope, though Nia would later discover she had been present informally for longer than that. She was 31, Korean Chinese, sharp-featured, with the particular kind of beauty that looks effortless until you look long enough to see how carefully it has been assembled. She worked initially as a liaison between the Baeko Syndicate's hospitality holdings and a new chain of private member clubs. Tae-jun was developing as a vehicle for legitimate revenue. She was good at her job. She was also, Nia would learn, exceptional at identifying what powerful men wanted to believe about themselves. With Tae-jun, she understood that he wanted to feel like a man who had outgrown his marriage without having to say so directly. She gave him that. She gave him a version of his own ambition reflected back at him with admiration rather than examination, and Tae-jun, who had once been attracted to Nia's refusal to simply agree with him, turned out, under sustained pressure from the syndicate and his mother and his own pride, to be no more immune to flattery than most men. Nia noticed the shift in him the way you notice a tide going out. Not the moment it happens, but in the increasing distance between where the water had been and where it now stood. She asked him directly twice. Both times he denied it. Both times his denial was technically accurate. Not the whole lie, just the part of it that couldn't immediately be disproved. And both times Nia absorbed the response and filed it alongside the growing body of evidence that something was being managed rather than answered. The second photograph arrived 3 weeks after the first, then a third, then documentation, a lease agreement on an apartment in Gangnam registered under a corporate shell, the payments traceable through a Baeko subsidiary, a credit card statement with entries at restaurants. Tae-jun had specifically told Nia were client dinners. The anonymous sender never identified themselves. Nia eventually concluded it was someone inside the syndicate, someone with access and a reason to want Tae-jun's position destabilized, or possibly someone who simply believed she deserved to know. She never found out which. What she found out instead was significantly worse. She hired Mara Ellison, Korean-American attorney, Seoul-based practice, known specifically for navigating the legal architecture that surrounded men like Tae-jun, and Seo Min-kyu, a former intelligence investigator who now worked for the kind of clients who needed documentation gathered in ways that were technically adjacent to legal. It took them 11 weeks. What they delivered was a comprehensive account. The affair had been ongoing for 18 months. Sarah was 4 months pregnant. Kwon Tae-jun had known for at least 6 weeks and had already begun making arrangements, quietly, through family channels, to ease Nia toward a departure that could be characterized as voluntary. The official narrative being prepared was that Nia, emotionally fragile after her miscarriages and unable to adapt to Korean family expectations, had chosen to leave of her own accord. There were already conversations underway about redecorating the nursery. When Min-kyu delivered that specific detail, the nursery, Nia looked at the page for a long time without speaking. He waited. "Who's doing the decorating?" she finally asked. Hyeran brought in a designer. Sarah has been consulted. Nia set the document down on the table between them. "How long do I have before anyone suspects I know?" "If you've been careful, 6 weeks, maybe 8. "Then I have 8 weeks, she said. Mara leaned forward. "Nia, what are you planning to do?" Nia looked at her. "I'm not going to disappear quietly," she said, "but I'm also not going to scream. I'm going to do what I'm trained to do." "Which is?" "Document the damage," she said, "and make sure it can never be pretended away." She told Tae-jun she had accepted a 6-month conservation fellowship in Copenhagen. It wasn't entirely a lie. Mara had helped her arrange it as a legitimate temporary position, cover, but functional cover, the kind that came with an actual office and actual work. When she told him, sitting across from him at the breakfast table on a Tuesday morning, Tae-jun put down his coffee and looked at her with an expression she had spent years trying not to read correctly. Relief. Fast, involuntary, immediately masked behind something that was supposed to look like concern, but she had studied his face for 8 years and she saw it. He said he understood. He said he respected that she needed time. He asked if they could talk when she returned. "Of course," she said. She smiled. He went to work, and Nia began taking the mansion apart and putting it back together in a form that told the truth. She worked methodically, the way she worked on damaged paintings. No wasted motion, no sentiment where precision was required. She printed photographs from Min-kyu's documentation and from her own files. She gathered receipts, messages, financial records. She organized them into a chronology that was impossible to misread. The first photograph, the first lie she had documented, the first payment, the lease, the prenatal appointment. Then she moved through the house. The foyer received the largest image first, Tae-jun and Sarah outside the Signal Hotel, his arm around her waist, her face turned toward his like she was the only gravitational field in the world. The staircase became a timeline. 18 months of evidence, arranged by date, ascending toward the upper floor. Yeren's sitting room received the older woman's own messages, printed and framed, including the one in which she had suggested that Nia's paintings could be removed from the library after she left, because they were, in Hyeron's exact phrasing, evidence of a sad woman's sad years. The library displayed the financial records. And then Nia stood outside the nursery door. She had not entered that room in 6 months. She opened it. What was inside stopped her breath. Fabric samples in pale green, a crib catalog with pages turned down, a handwritten note in Sarah's handwriting, measurements, color preferences, a question about whether the window treatment should match or contrast. They had already been in this room. While Nia was still living in this house, they had already decided how to replace what she had built here. Nia stood in the doorway for a very long time. Then she walked in. She placed one photograph on the wall. Tae-jun outside a prenatal clinic in Apgujeong, smiling with his hand resting on Sarah's belly. His entire body oriented toward the future he had built on top of the wreckage of everything he and Nia had survived together. Beneath it, she wrote 7 words on a piece of cardstock in black ink. This room was never empty. She taped it to the wall. Then she picked up 2 suitcases she had packed over the previous 4 days. She walked down the stairs. She did not look at the photographs as she passed them. She walked through the foyer, past the large image in the entryway, and out the front door. The car Mara had arranged was waiting at the bottom of the drive. Nia put her bags in the trunk, got in the back seat, and as the car pulled away from the gate, she turned once and looked through the rear window. The mansion stood enormous and still at the end of the drive, its pale stone facade already growing smaller. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel free. Not yet. What she felt sitting in the back of that car watching the house, her husband's empire had built grow distant in the glass, was the specific, terrible, clear-eyed sensation of a woman who has finally stopped lying to herself. Not a beginning, not an ending. Just the last moment she would ever spend inside a life that had been designed to contain her. The driver turned onto the main road. The mansion disappeared, and Nia Caldwell faced forward, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed, her heart a wreck she intended to repair. Slowly, honestly, without pretending the damage had never happened. Behind her, the walls of the house she had left were covered from floor to ceiling with everything Kwon Tae-jun had tried to make her forget. He would come home to the truth she had built, and there would be no version of the story in which he could pretend she had left quietly. The car had been moving for 11 minutes before Nia's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Tae-jun. She let it ring until it stopped, then set the phone face down on the seat beside her and watched the Han River appear between buildings as they crossed toward Gimpo. The water was gray and wide and indifferent, the way large bodies of water always are, and she found that comforting in a way she couldn't articulate. He called again. She turned the phone off, not because she was afraid of what he would say, not because hearing his voice would break her resolve. She turned it off because she had already decided that the next conversation she had with Kwon Tae-jun would happen in a room with lawyers present, and everything before that could wait. The driver, a man in his 50s who worked for the car service Mara used exclusively for sensitive client movements, had not said a word since picking her up. He didn't say anything now. He took the ramp toward the expressway with the practiced quiet of a man who had transported people through difficult moments before and understood that silence was a form of service. Nia sat with her hands in her lap and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The same rhythm she used when she was stabilizing a damaged panel, when her hands had to stay steady regardless of what her body was doing, when the work required her to be calm before she actually was. It didn't fully work, but it helped enough. Back in Hanam-dong, the mansion stood closed and undisturbed. The housekeeper, a woman named Park Jong-suk, who had worked for the Kwon family for 9 years, arrived at her usual time of 8:15 that morning to find the front door locked and no sign of either occupant. This was not unusual. Tae-jun kept irregular hours, and Nia had been quiet and contained for months in a way that Jong-suk had noticed but not commented on, because commenting on things was not a habit that survived long in the Kwon household. She used her key. She stepped into the foyer, and then she stopped. She stood very still for a long moment, looking at the large photograph mounted on the wall opposite the entrance. The one Nia had placed last, after everything else was arranged, the one designed to be the first thing anyone saw upon entering the house. Tae-jun and Se-ra, the Signal Hotel. His arm around her waist, her face tilted toward his, both of them completely unguarded in the way people are when they believe they are not being observed. Jong-suk had worked for this family for 9 years. She set her bag down on the entry table. She looked at the photograph for another 10 seconds. Then she picked her bag back up, walked back out the front door, locked it behind her, and called in sick for the first time since she had taken the position. She was never going to discuss what she saw. She was also never going to forget it. And she was, as of that morning, quietly beginning to assess how difficult it would be to find comparable employment with a different family. Kwon Tae-jun arrived home at 6:47 that evening. He had spent the day at the Beko Syndicate's legitimate headquarters, a sleek commercial property management company in Yeouido that generated enough real revenue to justify its existence while providing administrative cover for the syndicate's more complex financial movements. He had sat through 4 hours of meetings about a logistics contract dispute, eaten a working lunch with 2 of his senior lieutenants, and spent the final 2 hours of his afternoon exchanging messages with Sarah about whether the prenatal appointment scheduled for the following week needed to be moved. He was tired in the way he was always tired now, not from overwork, but from the specific fatigue of maintaining too many parallel versions of his own life simultaneously. He pulled into the garage. He killed the engine. He sat in the car for a moment, as he often did, letting the day settle before he went inside. Then he got out, straightened his jacket, and walked through the interior door into the ground floor corridor. He smelled something first. Not a physical smell, something more ambient, the particular atmospheric quality of a space that has been recently and carefully rearranged. He had grown up in environments where sensing changes in a room before identifying them could determine whether you walked out of it, and that instinct fired now, low and insistent, before he had even reached the foyer. He turned the corner and stopped. His own face looked back at him from across the room. He stood in the entrance to the foyer and looked at the photograph on the wall for a full 7 seconds without moving. His breathing didn't change. His expression didn't change. I was a man trained by decades of high-stakes criminal enterprise to absorb information without immediately reacting to it, and that training held for 7 seconds. Then he turned slowly and looked down the corridor toward the dining room, then up the staircase. He walked to the foot of the stairs and looked up at what lined the walls from the bottom step to the upper landing. He stood there for a long time. The silence of the house pressed against him with a physical weight. He pulled out his phone and called Nia. The number rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He walked up the stairs slowly, not touching the photographs on either side of him, reading dates and locations as he climbed. His jaw had tightened. The muscles at the back of his neck had gone rigid. By the time he reached the upper landing and turned toward the library, his hands were not entirely steady, though he kept them at his sides where no one could see them. Not that there was anyone to see. He was completely alone in a house his wife had turned into a testimony against him. He called his mother at 7:15. Kwon Hye-ran was at her residence in Seongbuk-dong, a property that the Kwon family had owned for 30 years. Its garden maintained by 2 groundskeepers, and its interior managed by a staff of 4 who had all signed confidentiality agreements. She was finishing dinner when his call came through, and she answered on the second ring because Tae-jun never called her at this hour unless something had gone wrong. "She's gone," he said. A pause. "Gone where?" "I don't know. Her things are partially cleared. 2 suitcases, I think. The rest is still here." Another pause, and then, "The house. What about it?" He didn't answer immediately. Yeran waited, and in the silence she heard something in her son's breathing that she had not heard in many years. Something tightly controlled but not entirely contained, like a structure under load. "She documented everything," he said. "It's on the walls. Every room." Yeran set her chopsticks down very carefully. "How much?" "Enough." His voice was flat, specific. Your sitting room as well. Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there in 40 minutes, she said. Don't bring anyone. I wasn't planning to. She arrived in 35. Tae-jun let her in through the side entrance and watched her walk from room to room without speaking. He had been inside the house for 2 hours by then and had walked through every room twice and still had not touched a single photograph. Some instinct, professional rather than personal, had told him to leave the scene undisturbed until he understood its full dimensions. Hyeran's composure lasted through the foyer, the dining room, and the library. It lasted until she turned into her own sitting room and stood before the framed copies of her own messages. The color left her face, not in a dramatic way. Hyeran was not a dramatic woman, but in the specific, bloodless way of someone absorbing a strike they had not anticipated from a direction they had underestimated. She had my private messages, she said. Yes. How? It wasn't a question, it was an accounting statement. The recognition that a security failure had occurred somewhere in a system she believed to be secure. Tae-jun watched his mother's face. She had help, he said. From inside? Someone gave her the initial photographs. After that, she hired people. Hyeran turned away from her messages and looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and cold, and without any of the warmth she occasionally permitted herself in his presence. You let this happen, she said. I know. You became careless. I know that too. The day-sick dinner is in 4 days. Her voice dropped. He's bringing Yo Sung-jin and 2 of the Busan partners. This was supposed to be an announcement of the next generation of Kwon leadership. I know what it was supposed to be. Then you understand what this display means if any of those men arrive and this house looks like... She gestured at the walls around them, at the accumulated evidence of her son's private life arranged like a gallery exhibition. Like this. Tae-jun said nothing. Call Min-ho, she said, referring to the head of his domestic security staff. Have this removed tonight, all of it. Tae-jun walked to the nearest framed photograph and lifted one corner. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a second copy. He looked at it for a moment, then let the framed print fall back against the wall. There are copies underneath, he said. I checked 15 of them. Hyeran stared at him. She prepared for removal, he said. Every photograph has at least one copy behind it. I haven't checked all of them, but I expect they all do. Some of the framed pieces are double-backed. There are copies and frames behind frames. The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms between 2 people who are each calculating separately. How thorough was she? Hyeran said finally. Very. His mother sat down in the chair nearest to her own chair, in her own sitting room, now papered with her own words. She sat very straight, the way she always sat, her hands folded in her lap, her face assembled into its habitual neutrality. But her hands, Tae-jun noticed, were not entirely still. Where is she now? Hyeran asked. I don't know. She told you Copenhagen. She told me Copenhagen. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't matter where she is physically. Hyeran's voice had recovered its precision. What matters is what she intends to do next. Has she filed anything? Not yet. Mara Ellison's office hasn't moved. Mara Ellison. His mother said the name with the deliberate flatness of someone who recognized it. She went to Ellison. Some time ago, apparently. Hyeran looked at her son with an expression that was not quite contempt, but sat very close to it. You knew she was meeting with attorneys? I suspected. I underestimated the timeline. You underestimated your wife, Hyeran said. The words sat between them. Tae-jun didn't contradict them. Sira found out at 9:17 that evening when Tae-jun called her from the library, the room in which Nia had displayed his financial records, and told her in a voice so deliberately controlled it frightened her that she needed to go to her sister's apartment and stay there until he contacted her. What happened? She asked. Nia left. A beat. Then, left? Or, she prepared the house before she went. There's documentation on the walls, photographs, records. Sira was quiet for a long moment. She was sitting in the apartment in Gangnam, the one paid for through the Baeko subsidiary, the one whose lease agreement Nia's investigator had located, and whose payment history was currently mounted on the library wall of the Hanam-dong mansion. She was 4 months pregnant, her feet were swollen, and she had spent the day redesigning the Kwon family event's guest seating because Hyeran had asked her to take on administrative tasks to prepare for her eventual role. That word, role, now sat differently in her mind. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough. Pause. Go to your sisters. Tae-jun, Seira. His voice carried no anger. It was worse than anger. It was a flatness that left no space for her to locate herself within it. Go tonight. She went. She sat in the back of a car she'd called on her phone, her hands folded over the swell of her stomach, and she thought about a conversation she'd had with Hyeran 3 weeks earlier, a long lunch at a private restaurant, where the older woman had laid out, in the calm and specific way she laid out all important things, exactly what Sarah's position would become once Nia was managed out of the picture. The word Hyeran had used was managed, not removed, not replaced, managed. Sarah had found the word distasteful at the time, but she had let it pass because the larger promise attached to it was too significant to jeopardize over vocabulary. Now, sitting in the back of a car in the dark, she thought about the difference between managed and prepared, and she thought about the fact that Nia Caldwell had apparently been doing one of those things for a very long time, and none of them had noticed. The next morning, Tae-jun called Park Hyun-woo. Hyun-woo was 46 years old, had worked for the Baeko Syndicate for 19 years, and currently functioned as the primary liaison between Tae-jun's criminal operations and the network of attorneys, accountants, and financial architects who kept the empire's legal surface clean. He was not a man given to alarm, which was his primary professional value. He arrived at the mansion at 8 in the morning, walked through the rooms in complete silence, took several photographs on his own phone, and then sat down across from Tae-jun in the kitchen, the one room Nia had left largely untouched, perhaps intentionally, and put his phone on the table. Tell me about the financial records, he said. Tae-jun told him. Hyun-woo listened without interrupting. When Tae-jun finished, he was quiet for a moment, then asked, The Seo Guipo account, the subsidiary that handled the apartment lease. Who has access to that beyond the three of us? 2 accountants and Min Ho. And she accessed the lease documentation through an external investigator, SEO Min Q. Hyun-woo's expression shifted slightly. Min Q had that. Yes. Then she has the full payment chain. Yes. Hyun-woo picked up his phone, looked at the financial documents displayed on the library wall in the photograph he'd taken, and set it back down. Kwon Tae-sik is going to have questions, he said. I know. Not about the marriage. He won't care about the marriage. Hyun-woo's voice was matter-of-fact. He's going to care about why personal expenditures connected to this woman are running through a corporate subsidiary. He's going to want to know what else has been run through the same account. There's nothing else that's an issue. Hyun-woo looked at him. Nothing that's an issue, Tae-jun repeated. He won't take your word for that, Hyun-woo said. He's going to send his own people to look at the books. The kitchen was very quiet. I know, Tae-jun said, and if they find anything that wasn't disclosed to him previously, they won't. Another look. They won't, Tae-jun said again, and his voice had acquired the specific final quality of a man closing a door on a question he doesn't want to examine further. Hyun-woo was too experienced to push. He gathered his things and stood. The dinner is in 3 days, he said. I know when the dinner is. You're going to need a version of this that Tae-sik can receive. I'll have one. Hyun-woo left without saying goodbye, which was the habit of a man who had learned that goodbyes invited conversation. Nia landed in Copenhagen at 6:15 in the morning, local time. The airport was pale and quiet and cool, and she stood at the baggage carousel with her 2 suitcases and her carry-on, and the specific disorientation of a person who has executed a plan so completely that the moment after its completion feels hollow rather than triumphant. She had done the thing. The thing was done. And now she was standing in an airport in a country where she knew 3 people waiting for her luggage, and her body was trying to process the previous 48 hours, and finding that it didn't have a framework for what she had just survived. She collected her bags. She walked through arrivals. Mara had arranged temporary accommodation, a furnished apartment near the restoration studio that had agreed to host her fellowship, a second-floor space with tall windows, and a kitchen that got morning light. Mara's assistant had sent a car. She found the driver, a young woman who held a sign with Nia's name spelled correctly, which felt like an absurd thing to feel grateful for, and which she felt grateful for nonetheless. In the car, she turned her phone back on for the first time since the previous afternoon. 14 missed calls from Tae-jun, 3 from a number she recognized as Hye-ran's personal line, 1 from an unknown Seoul number that she suspected was a Kwon family attorney, and 1 from Mara, timestamped 2 hours ago. She called Mara. "You landed," Mara said, "just now. Tae-jun called my office at 7 this morning. He wants to talk." "What did you tell him?" "That all communication goes through me. He wasn't happy. He'll manage." "Nia." Mara's voice shifted slightly. He also had Hyun-woo call, the Park Hyun-woo. Nia knew the name. She had seen it on financial documents. A closer associate of Tae-jun's than most people knew. What did Hyun-woo want? "He wanted to know the scope of the financial documentation you have." Nia looked out the car window at Copenhagen's flat gray morning light. "And what did you tell him?" "That we'd be happy to discuss scope during formal proceedings." "Good." "The Daesik dinner," Mara said. "It's in 3 days. If what Min-kyu told us about that event is accurate, it is. Then Tae-jun is going to spend the next 72 hours trying to neutralize the visual of what you left in that house before Daesik and his people arrive." "Yes," Nia said. "He might succeed. If he works fast enough and has enough people, he won't succeed," Nia said, a pause. "Why not?" "Because I didn't only put photographs on the walls," Nia said. Mara was quiet for a moment. "What else did you do?" Nia didn't answer immediately. The car was moving through the city now, past canals and old stone buildings and cyclists who moved with the calm confidence of people accustomed to the roads belonging to them. "I made sure," Nia said finally, "that removing the photographs would be the most visible thing he could possibly do. The copies behind copies were intentional. If he takes the photographs down, the walls show the tape marks and the anchor points. If he repaints, there's no time before the dinner. If he leaves them up, Daesik sees everything." Another silence. "He's trapped," Mara said. "I trapped him," Nia said, "not out of cruelty, because I needed to make sure that when I walked away, there was no version of events in which his family could say, 'I left quietly and without cause.'" She heard Mara exhale. "The divorce filing," Nia said. "How soon?" "I can move it within 48 hours. I was waiting for your instruction." "Move it in 24, Nia said. "I want it filed before the dinner." "Done." Mara paused once more. "Nia, are you all right?" Nia considered the question with the honest attention it deserved. "No," she said. "But I'm in the right place to start being all right. That's enough for now." She ended the call. The car pulled up outside a pale stone building on a narrow street with a canal visible at the far end. The driver helped her with her bags. Nia stood on the pavement and looked up at the second-floor windows, tall, old, the glass slightly wavy in the way of old panes, and breathed the cold morning air and understood that she had left the war behind her but had not yet arrived anywhere safe. She was in between. Not the woman who had walked into that kitchen and found the photograph in the envelope. Not the woman she was going to become. Something in transit, moving through the necessary geography between damage and repair. She carried her bags up the stairs. On the second day after Nia's departure, the first fracture appeared in Tae-jun's inner circle. One of his 2 senior accountants, a thin, precise man named Lim Dong-chul, who had worked on the Baeko accounts for 6 years, called Hyun-woo and asked, in a voice stripped of all effect, whether he should be talking to a personal attorney. Hyun-woo asked why. Dong-chul said that the account Min-kyu had accessed, the Seoul Guipo subsidiary, ran through his personal authorization codes at several points during the period in question, and that if those records were part of a formal divorce proceeding, his name was attached to financial movements he had been told were standard corporate expenditures. He had been told, he said, and he wanted it on record that he had been told. Hyun-woo told him to sit tight. Dong-chul sat tight for approximately 4 hours, then sent a formal communication to an outside attorney. The outside attorney happened to have a professional relationship with the tax enforcement division of the Korean government that had been quietly interested in the Baeko Syndicate's financial architecture for the better part of 3 years. None of this happened quickly, but it had started. Awesome. On the third day, Sarah called Tae-jun from her sister's apartment and told him she needed to know what was happening. He told her it was being managed. She asked what that meant. He said it meant she should stay where she was. I have a prenatal appointment tomorrow, she said. I've had to reschedule twice already. I can't go to the appointment, he said. Use the Apgujeong clinic, not the one in Gangnam. Different car service. Tae-jun, I'm not a package being rerouted. Sarah. His voice was quiet. I need you to trust me for the next 72 hours. The silence on her end was long enough that he could hear her breathing. The apartment, she said, the one in Gangnam. Is it on the documentation she left? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. So she knows about it, Sarah said. She knows the address. She has the lease. It's in a corporate name. That's my apartment, Tae-jun. She has documentation of my apartment, of how it was paid for. Another pause. Does she know what else I have there? He went very still. What else you have where? He said. The silence that followed was not the silence of a woman preparing to answer. It was the silence of a woman realizing she had said something she shouldn't have. Sarah. Nothing, she said. I just meant, what is in that apartment? Her breathing changed. The specific catch of someone calculating very fast whether the truth or a version of it would cost less. There are some files, she said, business-related. I've been keeping copies of certain operational documents, summaries of syndicate meeting minutes, as insurance, Tae-jun, nothing more, in case anything ever went wrong. He said nothing. The weight of his silence was enormous. I did it to protect myself, she said, and her voice had gone small and tight. I'm carrying your child and I have no legal standing in this family, and I needed something. Stop, he said. She stopped. You took operational records, he said, from syndicate meetings, and you stored them in the apartment whose lease documentation is currently in the possession of my wife's legal team. She didn't answer. Sarah. His voice had gone completely flat. Look at me in this moment and understand what I'm telling you. If Nia's attorney finds those files, if they are accessed as part of discovery, if they are disclosed to anyone outside this conversation, the problem is no longer a divorce. I know that, she whispered. I don't think you do, he said. Because if you did, you never would have told me about them on a phone call. The line went dead. Sarah sat in her sister's apartment with her phone in her hand and understood, in the way that arrived slowly and then all at once, that she had been so focused on becoming the next Kwon wife that she had never once considered what happened to a woman who made herself useful to a man like Tae-jun in ways that became inconvenient. She sat very still. Her hand moved to her stomach. And for the first time since the beginning of the affair, Sarah stopped thinking about what she wanted and started thinking about what she was actually in. The call Tae-jun made after hanging up on Sarah was not to Hyun-woo. It was to Min-ho, the head of his domestic security, who had been with him for 11 years and who understood without being told that certain requests were to be executed without documentation. What Tae-jun asked him to do was not violent. It was worse than violent in some respects because it was precise and cold and designed to solve a problem rather than express an emotion. He asked Min-ho to go to the Gangnam apartment before Nia's legal team could access it, to remove the operational files Sarah had described, and to ensure there was no documentary evidence that those files had ever been stored there. Min-ho confirmed the instruction. He was in the car within 20 minutes. He arrived at the apartment building at 11:47 in the evening and found, taped to the inside of the elevator, a small card in handwriting he didn't recognize. It read, "This has already been photographed. Copies are held externally. Removing materials from this location will not remove the record of their existence." Below that, a single word, Nia. Min-ho stood in the elevator for a long moment, looking at the card. Then he called Tae-jun. When Tae-jun answered, Min-ho said, "She anticipated this." The silence on Tae-jun's end was the silence of a man finally understanding the full architecture of what his wife had constructed, not in the hours before she left, but over weeks or months of quiet, methodical, invisible preparation. She had not left in a rage. She had left like a conservator, after documenting everything, protecting the documentation, and ensuring that no subsequent intervention could erase what she had found. "Come back," Tae-jun said. Min-ho came back. And Kwon Tae-jun sat alone in the mansion that was covered in evidence of his own choices, with the dinner 3 days away and a divorce filing moving through the courts and syndicate records potentially in the hands of his estranged wife's legal team, and understood that he was not facing a personal crisis. He was facing the most methodical opponent he had ever encountered, and she was already gone. The card was sitting on Tae-jun's kitchen table when Min-ho returned. He had brought it back with him, careful, deliberate, wearing gloves to lift it from the elevator panel, and he set it down in front of Tae-jun without comment and stood back and waited. Tae-jun looked at it for a long time. The handwriting was Nia's. He knew her handwriting the way he knew the sound of her footsteps on the upper floor, not from paying close attention, but from 8 years of proximity, the kind of knowledge that accumulates without your permission. The letters were small and precise, slightly forward-leaning, the way they always were when she was writing something she had thought through rather than something written in haste. She had written that card calmly. She had written it in advance, knowing he would send someone to the apartment, knowing what they would be looking for, knowing that by the time they arrived, the value of whatever was there had already been transferred somewhere he could not reach. He picked the card up with his bare hand, turned it over. The back was blank. He set it back down. "How many people know Sarah kept those files?" he said. "Right now?" Min-ho considered. "You, me, Sarah, whoever she told. Find out if she told anyone. That requires talking to her directly." "Then talk to her directly." Min-ho nodded and left the kitchen. Tae-jun sat at the table in the house, covered with photographs of his own choices, and looked at the card his wife had left in an elevator across the city, and the thing that he kept returning to, the thing that would not resolve itself into any category of professional experience he possessed, was the timeline. She had placed that card in the Gangnam apartment before she left Seoul, which meant she had known about the files before she left, which meant Seo Min-kyu's investigation had uncovered not just the lease and the payment history, but the contents of the apartment itself, or at least enough of those contents to know that something was there worth protecting against removal, which meant the question was not whether Nia had documentation of the syndicate records. The question was what she intended to do with them. Mara Ellison's office was on the 14th floor of a commercial building in Gangnam, glass-fronted, with a view of the district below that conveyed exactly the right combination of accessibility and elevation. She had built her practice over 12 years on the specific expertise of navigating Korean family law as it intersected with corporate structures, and she was known, quietly, among people who paid close attention to such things, for an unusual willingness to represent clients in situations that powerful men preferred to keep outside the legal system entirely. She arrived at her office at 7:15 the morning after Min-ho's failed visit to the Gangnam apartment and found Hyun-woo already in the lobby. She had not made an appointment with Hyun-woo. She stopped when she saw him, registered his presence without showing what she thought about it, and walked to the reception desk to collect her messages before turning back to him. "Mr. Park," she said, "I don't believe we've met formally." "We haven't," he said. "Thank you for seeing me." "I haven't agreed to see you yet." She looked at him with the particular attention of a woman who had been in rooms with dangerous men before and had learned to assess them quickly and without sentimentality. "If you're here on behalf of Kwon Tae-jun, you know all communication goes through this office in writing." "I'm aware," he said. "What I have to say won't take long, and it isn't a communication from Tae-jun. It's a professional courtesy." She studied him for another moment, then gestured toward the elevator. They sat in her conference room with the door closed and no assistant present, which was Mara's habit in conversations she wasn't certain she wanted on record. Hyun-woo placed his hands flat on the table, a gesture she recognized as deliberate, designed to communicate that he was not reaching for anything. "There are materials," he said, "that may have come into your client's possession through the course of her investigation. Materials that go beyond what is relevant to a divorce proceeding." "Everything in my client's possession is relevant to her case," Mara said. "Some of it," Hyun-woo said, "is relevant to things that are significantly larger than her case, and to individuals who are significantly less patient than Kwon Tae-jun." Mara held his gaze. "Are you threatening my client?" she said. "I'm providing information," he said. "What your client does with it is her decision. I'm asking that she understand the full weight of what she's holding before she decides. She understands her situation very well." "I don't think she understands this particular dimension of it." He leaned forward slightly. The records Sarah Yoon kept in that apartment were not only operational summaries. They included names, dates, financial flows that connect Baeko to interests outside of Korea, interests that have a great deal invested in those connections remaining private. Mara said nothing. If those records surface in a divorce proceeding, Hyun-woo said, the problem stops being Tae-jun's problem. It becomes a problem for several parties who have resources and reach that are not confined to Seoul. And those parties will not approach your client through an attorney. The room was very quiet. I'd like you to leave, Mara said. Hyun-woo stood without urgency. Courtesy, he said again, as if that framing made it something other than what it was. He left. Mara sat at the conference table for 3 minutes after he was gone, looking at the surface in front of her. Then she picked up her phone and called Copenhagen. Nia was in the studio when the call came. It was her 3rd day at the restoration facility, a converted warehouse space with north-facing skylights and long work tables, and the particular smell of conservation work that she had been breathing her whole professional life. Linseed oil and ethanol and old wood and the metallic undertone of precision instruments. She had been assigned a 17th century Dutch landscape panel with significant water damage along the lower third, and she had spent the morning doing nothing more than looking at it. The first stage of any restoration, the long looking, before anything was touched. She answered Mara's call and listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, the silence lasted several seconds. He sent Hyun-woo, Nia said. Not an attorney. Hyun-woo personally. Yes. That means Tae-jun isn't treating this as a legal matter yet. He's treating it as a crisis management problem. That's how I read it. Nia set down the magnifying glass she had been holding. She walked to the far end of the work table and stood with her back to the damaged painting, facing the north-facing windows and their flat gray autumn light. He knows about the files, she said. He knows we may have them. Hyun-woo didn't confirm directly that we do. He was fishing as much as warning. Do we have them? A brief pause. Min-kyu photographed the apartment 3 weeks ago, Mara said. We have photographs of the files' exteriors, enough to establish their existence. We don't have the contents. Sarah kept them in a locked fireproof case, and Min-kyu didn't breach it. Nia absorbed this. So they don't know how much we actually have. No. And the warning Hyun-woo delivered, the part about interests outside Korea. Yes, Mara said. Her voice was careful. Nia, I have to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. When Min-kyu briefed you on the apartment, did he tell you anything about what might be in those files beyond the operational summaries? The question was specific, and Nia heard its specificity. He told me they were sensitive enough that accessing them directly would change the nature of what we were doing, she said. He told me they connected Baeko to external parties, and that those connections were the kind that carried physical risk. He used that exact phrase. And you chose not to access them. I chose to document their existence and leave their contents untouched, Nia said, because my goal was a clean divorce with my assets protected, not a war with people I don't know anything about. Mara exhaled. Then we need to make sure that's clearly communicated, she said. How? I can reach back to Hyun-woo informally and clarify the scope of what we have. That we have documentation of the file's existence as leverage for the divorce proceedings and nothing more. And if I do that, Nia said, I reduce my leverage. Yes. But I reduce the risk, significantly. Nia stood at the window and watched a cyclist move along the canal below, unhurried in the cold air, scarf trailing. Do it, she said, but wait 48 hours. I want the divorce filing to land first. Once it's in the system, the timeline is mine, not his. Understood, Mara said. Then, Nia, are you safe where you are? Yes, she said. And then with more honesty, I think so. She ended the call, walked back to the damaged painting, and picked up her magnifying glass. The lower third of the panel showed a landscape nearly consumed by water damage. The original colors still visible under the destruction if you knew how to look for them, preserved in the wood structure even as the surface had degraded. She looked at it for a long time without moving. She was thinking about Hyun-woo's phrase, interests outside Korea. The way he had said resources and reach not confined to Seoul in the tone of a man who was not exaggerating for effect, but was giving her a precise measurement. She had planned for Tae-jun. She had planned for Hyeran. She had planned for the Kwon family's attorneys and their accountants and their narrative management. She had not planned for whoever had their name in Sarah's locked fireproof case. The news arrived on the fourth day, and it arrived through a channel Nia had not anticipated. Seo Min-kyu called her directly, which he rarely did, preferring to route communication through Mara. And his voice had the specific quality of a man who had discovered something he hadn't been looking for and was still deciding how to characterize it. "There's a problem," he said. "Tell me." "The source," he said. "The anonymous sender who gave you the initial photographs of Tae-jun and Sarah. I've known for some time who it was, but I held it because it wasn't relevant to your case." Nia waited. "It's become relevant," Min-kyu said. "Who was it?" He paused. Not dramatically, just the genuine pause of a man who understood that what he was about to say would change the architecture of everything. "His name is Kwon Tae-jun," he said. "He's 43 years old. He's Tae-jun's first cousin on his father's side. He spent 12 years as a mid-level logistics manager in the Baeko syndicate before Tae-jun restructured the organization 4 years ago and removed him from operational involvement." Nia sat down. She was in the apartment near the canal, at the small kitchen table, still in the clothes she had worn to the studio. "Tae-jun cut him out," she said. "Completely. His access, his income stream from syndicate operations, his status. Jaewon got a settlement, property, and a lump sum, but he lost his position and his relevance in the family structure. So the photographs were revenge." "Partly," Min-kyu said. "But there's more. The reason I'm calling now rather than continuing to sit on this is that Jaewon made contact with me yesterday. He reached out through an intermediary, someone we both know professionally, and he told me something that I've spent 24 hours trying to verify." Nia pressed her hand flat on the table. "He told me," Min-kyu said, "that the files Sarah kept in the Gangnam apartment, the ones we documented but didn't open, weren't Sarah's idea. The kitchen was very quiet." "Whose idea were they?" Nia said. "Chaewon's," Min-kyu said. "He approached Sarah approximately 8 months ago. He told her that her position in the Kwon family was vulnerable, which was accurate, and that she needed insurance. He coached her on what to copy and how to store it. He told her he was doing it out of loyalty to her, because he could see that Tae-jun would eventually discard her the same way he had discarded him." Nia's breathing was very controlled. "He was using her," she said. "He was building a file," Min-kyu said. "Sarah was the vehicle. The files she accumulated over 8 months contained documentation that Jaewon himself couldn't access after his removal, because he'd lost clearance, but that Sarah, as Tae-jun's mistress with access to personal and professional spaces, could reach. And the purpose," Nia said, "the actual purpose." Min-kyu took a breath. "Jaewon has been in communication with parties in the external network, the same network Hyun-woo was warning you about. He's been building a case, documentation of Baeko's foreign connections, that he intends to trade for money and resettlement outside Korea. He's not exposing the syndicate out of principle. He's selling what he can gather to the highest bidder, and he used Sarah to gather most of it." The silence that followed was long. "So the photographs he sent me," Nia said slowly, "starting my investigation, leading to Min-kyu's involvement, leading to our documentation of the Gangnam apartment. He needed someone legitimate to document that the files existed," Min-kyu said. "Someone whose name and professional credibility would attach to the documentation. A divorce attorney, a licensed investigator. If he went directly to external parties with files he'd stolen, he'd have no protection. But if those files were documented as part of a legal proceeding by reputable professionals, he could claim they were already in the hands of Korean legal authorities," Nia said, "which gives him protection from Tae-jun and gives him something to trade to the external parties as evidence of their exposure." "Yes," Min-kyu said. The word landed like something dropped from a height. Nia stood up from the table. She walked to the window and looked down at the canal. She had been a tool, not the woman who had outplayed Kwon Tae-jun, not the conservator who had documented her own destruction with professional precision, not the architect of her own escape. She had been a tool in Kwon Jae-won's plan from the moment the first photograph had slid through her mail slot. The grief she had carried, the hours on the kitchen floor, the weeks of preparation, the photographs on the walls, the nursery, the message she had written on the card, the 2 suitcases. The drive to the airport. All of it real, all of it necessary, all of it also exactly what someone else had needed her to do. Her legs felt unsteady. She sat back down. "Is he in Seoul?" she said. "As of this morning." "Does Tae-jun know Chaewon was the source?" "I don't think so, not yet." "Does Chaewon know that Hyun-woo visited Mara?" "Almost certainly. He has sources in Tae-jun's circle. That's how he's been operating." Nia pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. "Min-kyu." Her voice was very level. "What does Chaewon want from me now? Why did he make contact through you?" Another pause. "He wants you to keep the pressure on Tae-jun," Min-kyu said. "He wants the divorce proceeding to continue and to generate as much formal legal documentation as possible. Every deposition, every financial disclosure, every record that surfaces in discovery, it all becomes part of the established file that protects him. And if I pull back, if you pull back, or if you settle quietly, or if you reach any kind of private resolution with Tae-jun, then the legal record goes thin, and Chaewon loses his protective architecture. He becomes a man who stole documents from a criminal organization with no legitimate institutional cover." "He needs me to keep fighting," Nia said. "He needs you to keep fighting," Min-kyu confirmed. She sat very still for a moment. "And the external parties," she said, "the ones Hyun-woo warned me about. If they learn that Chaewon has been using a divorce proceeding as cover, they'll trace it back through the legal record to everyone named in it," Min-kyu said, "including Mara, including me." The understanding arrived fully assembled. She had built a structure she believed was her protection. It was also a structure that could collapse on top of everyone inside it if Chaewon's plan failed, if the external parties became impatient, if Tae-jun discovered his cousin's role and responded the way a man like Tae-jun responded to betrayal from within his own family. She was not standing outside the danger. She had been inside it from the day the first photograph arrived. "How much time do we have before Chaewon moves?" she said. "He told the intermediary he's waiting for the day-sick dinner. He wants to see whether Tae-jun's position in the syndicate is weakened before he takes his documentation to the external buyers. A weakened Tae-jun means reduced risk that the syndicate can respond in time to stop him. The day-sick dinner. In less than 24 hours. Nia closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was looking at the wall of the Copenhagen apartment. Bare, pale, a small crack in the plaster near the window frame, a water stain from some previous winter along the upper edge. She was a conservator. She looked at damaged things, and she did not pretend they were undamaged. She did not pretend this was undamaged. "Call Mara," she said. "Tell her not to reach back to Hyun-woo. Tell her to pause all external communications until she hears from me. And the divorce filing? That's already in the system. That stays." "What are you going to do?" Min-kyu asked. She had built a careful plan. A clean departure. A documented departure. No confrontation, no screaming, no emotional outburst that Tae-jun could use against her. She had been proud of its precision. Now she understood that precision alone was not enough. That she had been precise about the wrong problem, that the room she was actually in was significantly larger and darker than the room she thought she had entered. "I'm going to do the thing I should have done 8 weeks ago," she said. "Which is?" "Talk to Tae-jun directly." The silence on Min-kyu's end was the specific silence of a professional who has learned not to tell clients they are making a mistake when those clients have just arrived at the only available option. "When?" he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Before the dinner. Before Chaewon moves. And before Daesik arrives at that house and sees everything on those walls without any context that could help either of us." "You want to warn him," Min-kyu said. It wasn't quite disbelief. More like a man processing a recalibration. "I want to control what happens next," Nia said. "Chaewon used me. He used my grief and my legitimate injury and my professional instincts to build his case. And now whoever is on the other end of his transaction is a problem that lands on everyone connected to those files, including people who are connected because they were trying to help me." She stood again. "I didn't walk away from Tae-jun to spend the rest of my life running from something I didn't put in motion," she said. "I walked away so I could stop being managed by the choices of men around me. And calling Tae-jun directly is the only move that Chaewon hasn't planned for," she said. Because Jaiwan built his entire architecture on the assumption that the one thing Nia Caldwell would never do is voluntarily contact the man she just divorced. She pulled the phone away from her ear, looked at Tae-jun's number in her contacts, and pressed call before the part of her brain that dealt in self-protection could assemble an argument against it. It rang twice. He answered on the third ring, and in the half-second before either of them spoke, she heard his breathing, sharp, controlled, the breathing of a man who had been awake for most of 3 days. And she understood that he was as far from the version of himself she had married as she was from the woman who had walked into that gallery exhibition 8 years ago and asked a man in a black suit about the philosophy of restoration. "Nia," he said. His voice was not angry. It was exhausted and stripped and careful in the way of something that has been underload for a very long time. "We have a problem," she said, "and it is not the problem you think it is." The silence on his end was total. "Someone used both of us," she said. "And if we don't deal with that together, in the next 18 hours, everyone connected to the past 3 months is in danger, including people who have nothing to do with our marriage." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Tell me." And Nia Caldwell, the woman who had spent 8 weeks preparing to never speak to this man outside a courtroom, sat in a bare apartment in Copenhagen and began dismantling the last wall she had built, because the alternative was watching it fall on top of people who hadn't built it. The affair, the photographs, the nursery, the divorce, all of it was still exactly what it was. None of that had changed. But the fire she thought she had walked away from had followed her to a different country, and it had names in it she hadn't put there, and it was moving faster than anyone in its path had realized. She talked. He listened. And outside the Copenhagen apartment, the canal moved dark and cold through the city, and somewhere in Seoul the sun was already coming up on the day of the day-sick dinner, and Kwon Tae-jun was sitting in a hotel room with a locked case of documents and the particular calm of a man who believed he had already won. Tae-jun listened for 22 minutes without interrupting. Nia knew because she watched the timer on her phone screen while she talked, a habit from long conference calls. And in those 22 minutes, she laid out everything Min-kyu had told her in the same order, and with the same precision she would have used presenting a conservation assessment. Damage first, then scope, then what the damage meant for the structural integrity of what remained. When she finished, the line was quiet for long enough that she checked to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. "Say his name again," Tae-jun said. "Kwon Tae-jun." Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not louder, not angrier, but denser somehow, like a material under compression. "How long have you known he was the source?" "Min-kyu identified him weeks ago," she said. "He held it because it wasn't relevant to the divorce. It became relevant yesterday." "When Chaewon made contact?" "Yes." "Through Min-kyu." "Through an intermediary they share. Min-kyu told me immediately." She heard Tae-jun exhale, a single, controlled breath, the kind that a man uses to keep himself from doing the thing his body wants to do. "The files Sarah kept," he said. "You don't have the contents. We have photographs of the exteriors, enough to document their existence, not enough to know what's inside." "But Chaewon knows what's inside because he told her what to copy." "Yes. And he's already in contact with the buyers. According to what he told the intermediary." The silence this time was different. It had a quality of calculation to it. She could almost feel him moving pieces. "The dinner is in 11 hours, he said. "I know." "Daesik is already in Seoul. He arrived this afternoon with Yo Sung-jin and 2 Busan partners. They're staying at the Shilla." "Tae-jun," she kept her voice flat. "I'm not calling to help you manage the dinner. I'm calling because Mara and Min-kyu are named in the documentation trail Jaewon is using as cover. If his transaction goes wrong, if the buyers decide the documentation is incomplete or the exposure is too great, they will trace the paper backward. Through Min-kyu, through Mara, through me. I understand that." "I don't think you fully understand that I am not in Seoul," she said. "I cannot protect myself or the people who helped me if this comes apart on your end. I'm not going to let it come apart." "You didn't know your cousin was running an operation inside your organization for 8 months, she said. "Not cruelty, just the fact, stated plainly, because the situation required plainness. Knowing about it now doesn't mean you control it." He didn't answer that, because it was true, and he was not a man who argued with facts. "What do you need from me?" he said. The question surprised her. Not its content, but its directness, the absence of negotiation around it. She had expected resistance, maneuvering, the reflexive deflection of a man whose entire adult life had been structured around controlling the terms of every exchange he entered. Instead, he had asked what she needed. She had prepared for many versions of this conversation, not that one. "I need you to find Jae-won before he moves tonight," she said. "I need you to secure those files before he delivers them. And I need it done without generating additional exposure for anyone whose name is in the legal record. Without violence." It wasn't a question. He had read her correctly. "Without violence," she confirmed. "If this becomes a body, Mara's office is inside the story. If this stays a family dispute over stolen property, it stays contained." "A family dispute," he said, and something in his voice, not quite bitterness, not quite recognition, moved across the words. "You have a better framing?" "No," he said. "No, that's the right framing." He was quiet for a moment. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Daisik already knows Jae-won has been making contact with external parties," he said. "He found out 3 days ago through his own sources. He didn't tell me. He was waiting to see if I would bring it to him." The weight of that settled over the conversation. "So the dinner," Nia said slowly, "was never going to be about Sarah's pregnancy," he said. "Daisik doesn't care about the pregnancy. He was coming to see whether I could be trusted to manage a threat inside my own family, whether I knew about it, whether I had the control he requires of someone in my position. And you didn't know." "And I didn't know," he said, "until 11 minutes ago." She pressed her hand against the table. "You're going to walk into that dinner," she said, "with 11 hours to find your cousin, secure stolen operational files, and present to Kwon Tae-jun a version of events that demonstrates you had control of a situation you were actually blindsided by." "Yes." "That's not possible," she said. "Probably not," he said. "But the alternative is letting Chaewon sell those files tonight and watching everything built over 30 years go up because I was too proud to admit what I didn't know." His voice on that last phrase was very quiet. She recognized in it something she hadn't heard in years. Not the Baeko Syndicate's chief executive, not the man who had spent 18 months lying to her face, but the version of Tae-jun she had first encountered in a gallery in Insadong, a man capable of looking at a damaged thing honestly and asking the right question about it. She hated that she recognized it. She hated more that it didn't change anything about what he had done. "Be careful," she said, because it was the only thing left to say that was both true and appropriate. She ended the call. She sat in the apartment in Copenhagen with her phone on the table and looked at her own hands. Then she called Min-kyu and told him to watch every exit from Jaewon's hotel. Jaewon was staying at a business hotel in Mapogu under a name that was not his own, which was the kind of operational habit that 43 years in and around the Baeko Syndicate had made instinctive. He had arrived 4 days earlier, timed to coincide with the build-up to the day-sick dinner, and he had spent those 4 days in a room on the 9th floor with a locked aluminum case under the bed and a burner phone that connected him to 3 separate intermediaries in 2 countries. He was not a nervous man by disposition. He was nervous now. Not because the plan was failing. As of 9 that evening, the plan was proceeding correctly. His contact in Tokyo had confirmed receipt of the preliminary documentation summary. The buyers were interested. The exchange was scheduled for the following week, once Jaewon had cleared Korean territory. He was nervous because of Tae-jun, specifically because of the fact that Tae-jun had not, in the 72 hours since Nia's departure went public, done the thing Jaewon had expected him to do. Jaewon had expected rage, humiliation made loud. He had expected Tae-jun to react the way he always reacted to losses he hadn't anticipated, with force applied rapidly and visibly, burning through resources and favors in the immediate need to reassert control. Instead, Tae-jun had gone quiet. In 11 years of working for the man and 4 years of despising him from a distance, Jaewon had learned that Tae-jun's silence was more dangerous than his anger. Anger was reactive. Silence was architecture. I was considering this at 9:17 in the evening, sitting on the edge of the bed with the burner phone in his hand, when his secondary phone, the registered one, in his real name, buzzed with a message from a number he recognized immediately. It was Tae-jun's private line, not a call, a text. 4 words. I know. Come home. Chaewon looked at the message for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street 9 floors below. There were 2 cars parked on the opposite side of the road that had not been there an hour ago. Dark, late-model sedans, engines off. He couldn't see the occupants, but the positioning was not accidental. One covering the main entrance, one covering the side exit onto the cross street. He had been found. The question was not whether to run. Running would confirm everything and remove any plausible deniability. The question was whether going to Tae-jun voluntarily, on his terms, with the files still in his possession before the dinner, gave him any leverage he didn't currently have. He turned from the window. He picked up the aluminum case from under the bed and set it on the mattress. Then he made a phone call to the Tokyo intermediary and spoke for 90 seconds, quietly and precisely. And when he ended the call, the preliminary documentation summary that had been transmitted earlier in the evening had been supplemented with a secondary package, an insurance transmission, already encrypted and delivered to a separate holding address that only opened if Chaewon failed to send a specific code within 24 hours. A dead man's switch. Not original, but effective. He picked up the case. He put on his jacket. He took the elevator to the lobby and walked through the main entrance and got into the first of the 2 dark sedans without being asked, because running was no longer the play, and leverage was the only currency he had left. They brought him to a building in Yeongdeung-pyo that Jae-won recognized, a Baeko Logistics property, legitimate face, 2 floors of actual warehouse operation, and 1 floor above that, which had no official function. He had worked in this building for 6 years before Tae-jun restructured him out of relevance. Walking back into it was the specific, nauseating experience of returning to a place that had once made sense of your life and finding it indifferent to your absence. They took him to the upper floor. Tae-jun was already there. He was standing near the window with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. Not a casual gesture, but the unconscious preparation of a man who has been working for hours and has set aside the performance of authority in favor of the practical requirements of the actual situation. There were 2 men positioned near the door, neither of whom Chae-won recognized, which was deliberate. Familiar faces would have softened the room. Tae-jun looked at Jae-won for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at the aluminum case. "Set it down," he said. "I'd prefer to hold it," Chae-won said. "I know you would." Tae-jun walked slowly across the room and stopped 3 feet away. "Set it down." Jae-won set it down, not because he was afraid, he told himself he was not afraid, but because the 2 men near the door had the specific quality of men for whom instructions and outcomes were connected by very short intervals, and because the case was insured and the fear he actually felt was more complex than simple physical threat. "You contacted Min-kyu," Tae-jun said. "I contacted an intermediary." "Through whom you reached Min-kyu, through whom you sent a message to Nia." He tilted his head slightly. "You wanted me to know it was you." Chae-won said nothing. "Why?" Tae-jun said. "Because I wanted you to understand it wasn't random," Chae-won said. "I wanted you to know it was someone who understood exactly what they were doing and exactly what it cost." Tae-jun looked at him. "You sent my wife photographs of my affair," he said. "You coached Sarah to steal operational documentation. You built an 8-month operation inside my house and my organization using my mistress as a tool and my wife's grief as the mechanism. And you want me to understand that wasn't random." "I want you to understand it was earned," Chae-won said. His voice had steadied. The thing about Chae-won, the thing that had made him useful for 12 years and dangerous for 4, was that he was most composed when the situation was at its worst, because the worst was what he had been preparing for. "You took everything from me, not because I failed at anything, because you wanted a cleaner structure and I was inconvenient. You were taking unauthorized cuts from 3 separate logistics accounts," Tae-jun said, "for 2 years. I was taking what the work warranted and what you were too proud to formalize. The amounts weren't the point, and you know it." "Then what was the point?" "You were building a private position," Tae-jun said. "Resources outside the structure. The cuts were the evidence of that intention, not the crime itself." Chae-won went very still, because that was accurate. And because Tae-jun, knowing it was accurate, knowing the real reason, the deeper architecture of what Jae-won had been trying to build before he was removed, meant the restructuring had been more precisely targeted than Chae-won had ever admitted to himself. "So you knew," Chae-won said. "I suspected," Tae-jun said. "I chose the cleaner solution." "You chose the solution that hurt me most and cost you least." "Yes," Tae-jun said, without apology and without softening. "That's the job." The room absorbed that. Chae-won looked at his cousin, really looked, the way you look at someone when the performance on both sides has been stripped away. And what he saw was not the monster he had constructed over 4 years of resentment, and not the person he had worked alongside for 12, but something more specific and more disturbing. A man who had simply been doing the calculus of power and had arrived at a result that happened to destroy Chae-won's position, without particular malice, and had moved on. "The dinner is in 4 hours, Chae-won said. "I know when the dinner is. Dae-sik knows I've been making contact externally. He told me an hour ago, over the phone. He was—" Tae-jun paused, and something moved across his face that Chae-won read correctly as controlled humiliation. "Generous enough to give me the opportunity to address it before he arrived." "And if you can't address it?" Tae-jun looked at him without blinking. "Open the case," he said. "There's an insurance transmission," Chae-won said. "If I don't send a confirmation code within 24 hours, the secondary package goes to the Tokyo address automatically." "I know," Tae-jun said. "You set it up through Ito's network. Ito has worked with us for 9 years. He called me 40 minutes ago." The floor seemed to shift slightly under Chae-won's feet. "Open the case," Tae-jun said again, "and send the cancellation to the Tokyo address. Now, before this conversation goes any further." Chae-won looked at him. His leverage was gone. The dead man's switch had been identified and neutralized before he had arrived in this room. Ito, 9 years apparently worth more to Tae-jun than to Chae-won's transaction, had made his choice and made it fast. Chae-won sat down on the nearest chair. He hadn't been offered a chair. He sat down anyway because his legs had decided the situation had gone on long enough without acknowledgement. He looked at the aluminum case. Then he looked at Tae-jun. "What do you want?" he said. "The files," Tae-jun said. "The cancellation sent. The Tokyo contact burned. And your silence, permanent, total, and backed by whatever property and accounts you still have registered in your name, which my attorneys will hold in trust until I determine you've held the silence long enough to have earned them back." Chae-won laughed, not because it was funny, but because the laugh was the only thing standing between him and the full force of what was happening. "You're going to take everything again," he said. "I'm giving you a structure," Tae-jun said. "That's more than the alternative." "And if I say no?" Tae-jun said nothing. One of the men near the door shifted his weight. Chae-won looked at the case. He reached down, entered the combination, opened it. He picked up the burner phone and sent the cancellation code to the Tokyo address, then held the screen toward Tae-jun so he could read the delivery confirmation. Tae-jun took the phone, confirmed the message, and handed it to one of the men near the door. Then he looked at the files in the open case. He looked at them for a long moment, at the organized folders of operational summaries, meeting minutes, financial flows, names, the documentation of 30 years of work extracted and compiled and nearly sold. He closed the case. He picked it up. "Go back to your hotel," he said. "Don't leave the city until I contact you." Chae-won stood. "That's it?" he said. "That's the beginning," Tae-jun said. "We'll discuss the rest after the dinner." Chae-won walked to the door. He stopped, without turning around. "She didn't deserve any of this. Nia, none of what you did to her." The room was quiet. "I know," Tae-jun said. Chae-won left. The Dae-sik dinner was scheduled for 10 in the evening at the Hanam-dong mansion. Tae-jun arrived at 9:15, which gave him 45 minutes in the house alone before the cars arrived. He stood in the foyer and looked at the photograph on the wall. Himself and Sarah, outside the Signal Hotel, his arm around her waist, her face turned toward his. He had not removed it. He had walked through this house 3 times in the past 4 days, and had not removed a single photograph, a single document, a single piece of the testimony his wife had constructed on every surface. Not because he couldn't, because something, professional instinct, or something older and less nameable, had told him that removing the evidence was the wrong move. That what he was facing was not an image problem to be managed, but an accounting to be survived. He stood in the foyer in a fresh dark suit and looked at his own face in the photograph for a long time. Then he went to the library and sat down and waited. Kwon Tae-jun arrived at 10:03. He was 71 years old, built like a man who had once been physically formidable and was now merely solid, with white hair kept short and eyes that had spent 5 decades assessing rooms, people, and threats with the same calibrated attention. He had built the Baeko Syndicate from a small Busan operation into the most durable criminal enterprise in South Korea, which he had managed by combining genuine intelligence with an absolute intolerance for disorder in his own organization. He walked through the foyer of the Hanam-dong mansion without breaking stride, without looking at the photograph on the wall, without any expression that acknowledged the photographs lining the staircase or covering the walls of the rooms he passed through. He sat down in the library across from Tae-jun and looked at him. Yo Sung-jin and the 2 Busan partners stood near the doorway. They did not sit. Dae-sik said nothing for a full 30 seconds. The silence had the weight of a structural element. "Tell me," he said finally. Tae-jun told him. All of it. He started with Sarah, not with the Chaewon revelation, but with Sarah, with the affair, with Nia's discovery and departure, with the documentation on the walls. He told it the way he had told Nia he would tell it, without excuse, without the softening narrative the Kwon family had prepared for their allies, without the version in which Nia had left voluntarily due to emotional fragility. Dae-sik listened and did not interrupt. Then Tae-jun told him about Chaewon. He laid it out chronologically. The anonymous photographs, Nia's investigation, the Gangnam apartment, Sarah's files, Chaewon's coaching, the Tokyo contact, the insurance transmission, and the conversation in Yeongdeung-pyo 3 hours earlier. He placed the aluminum case on the desk between them. When he finished, Dae-sik looked at the case. "Is this complete?" he said. Min-kyu is verifying against his inventory of the apartment photographs. "I believe it's complete." "You believe?" "Yes." Dae-sik's jaw moved slightly. "Your wife contacted you," he said, "last night. She told you about Chaewon?" "Yes." "And your response was to locate Chaewon and retrieve the files before bringing this to me?" "Yes." "Why?" Tae-jun looked at him directly. "Because I needed to bring you a problem I had addressed, not a problem I was asking you to address for me," he said. "If I came to you with Chaewon still operational, with the files still in his hands, with the Tokyo connection still live, I would be bringing you a crisis and asking you to carry it. That's not the position I should be in." Dae-sik looked at him for a long time. "Your wife," he said again. "She called you, to warn you." "Yes." "After leaving the country, after filing for divorce, after—" He glanced briefly at the walls of the library, at the financial records mounted there. "All of this." "Yes." Dae-sik leaned back slightly in his chair. "Why did she do that?" Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. "Because her attorney and her investigator were inside the documentation trail Chaewon was using as cover," he said. "She was protecting them. Not you." "Not primarily, no." Something moved in Dae-sik's eyes. Not warmth, but a kind of recognition. "You understand what she did," he said. "Coming to you, what it cost her." "Yes," Tae-jun said. "I understand it completely." "And you still let the affair run for 18 months. The question sat in the room with the directness of an accounting statement. Tae-jun did not look away. "Yes," he said. The room was completely silent. Yo Sung-jin and the Busan partners were very still near the doorway. Dae-sik picked up a glass of water from the table beside him. Someone had placed glasses and a decanter there, and Tae-jun noted distantly that it must have been a staff member, that the house still had some operational function despite everything, and drank once and set it down. "The financial exposure," Dae-sik said. "The subsidiary accounts. Your accountant Lim Dong-chul has already made contact with an outside attorney." "I know." "He's nervous. He has reason to be. Can he be managed?" "He can be reassured," Tae-jun said carefully. "I don't intend to let him become a problem, but reassurance requires being honest with him about the divorce timeline and its boundaries, which requires trusting your wife's attorney to maintain those boundaries." "Yes." Dae-sik studied. "You're asking me to trust the judgment of a woman who covered this house with evidence of your failures," he said. "I'm telling you that the woman who covered this house with evidence of my failures also called me from another country to prevent a security breach that would have damaged people connected to this organization, Tae-jun said. She did that with no legal obligation, no personal benefit, and significant personal risk. Her judgment has been, in my experience over 8 years, consistently correct. Day-sik said nothing. I failed her, Tae-jun said. That is not a complicated statement. I failed her in every way a man can fail a person who trusted him. The reasons for that failure don't make it less complete. The silence that followed was long enough that the building settled, a small structural groan from somewhere in the floors above them. Then Day-sik spoke. The Seoguipo subsidiary, he said, suspended, pending full audit by my accountants, not yours. Understood. The Busan partnership accounts, all three, frozen at the operational level until the audit concludes. Understood. J1. Day-sik's voice dropped. He stays in Seoul. He communicates with no one outside approved channels. He is your responsibility until I determine otherwise. Yes. And Sarah. Tae-jun waited. She carries a Kwon child, Day-sik said. That is a fact, and I do not disregard facts because they are inconvenient. But she stored operational materials in an unsecured private residence and gave access to a disgraced family member who used them for personal profit. He paused. She is not the next Kwon wife. Not now, possibly not ever. That decision is not yours to make unilaterally. Tae-jun said nothing. Do you understand what I am telling you? Day-sik said. Yes, Tae-jun said. Say it. You are telling me that the consequences of what I built over the past 18 months are not finished, Tae-jun said. That the people most damaged by my choices have not finished being damaged. And that the organizational authority I have been exercising is subject to review because I demonstrated that my personal life and my professional judgment are not as separate as they are required to be. Day-sik looked at him for a long moment. Your wife, he said one more time. Yes. You lost a good woman. It was not a question. Yes, Tae-jun said. And you know that. I have known it, Tae-jun said, since about 40 minutes after she left. Day-sik stood. The two Busan partners straightened. The dinner, Day-sik said, is concluded. He walked through the library door, through the foyer with its large photograph, down the front steps, and into the car waiting at the bottom of the drive. He did not look at the walls. He had seen everything he needed to see. At 11:47 that evening, Mara Ellison's phone buzzed. She was still in her office, had been in her office since Min-kyu's call the previous night, and she looked at the screen and saw an incoming call from a Seoul number she recognized as Tae-jun's private line. She considered it for one ring. Then she answered. Mr. Kwon, she said, Ms. Ellison. His voice was steady and controlled and sounded like a man who had been awake for most of 72 hours and was operating on the specific fuel of a situation that had not yet allowed him to stop. I want to make an offer, not to you, to your client, through you, as her representative. I'm listening. The divorce proceeds on her timeline, he said. I waive contest on asset division. Her proposed settlement terms, which I assume you have prepared, I will accept without negotiation on the core provisions, the properties, the financial reimbursement, the artwork, all of it. Mara held the phone and said nothing. In exchange, he said, I ask for one thing. Not a legal concession, not a restriction on what she can say or do. I ask that she know, formally, through you, on the record, that what she did last night, calling me, is something I understand the full weight of. That I am not treating it as a sign that she has forgiven anything. I know she hasn't. I know she won't. I am simply asking that she know I understand what it cost. Mara sat very still in her 14th floor office with Seoul spread out below her. I'll convey that to my client, she said. Thank you, he said. He ended the call. Mara set her phone down. She picked it up again and called Copenhagen. Nia answered on the second ring. He accepted the settlement, Mara said. Full terms, no negotiation. Nia said nothing for a moment. And, she said, because she knew Mara well enough to hear when there was more. Mara told her what he had said. All of it, word for word, including the last part. The silence on Copenhagen's end was very long. Is he telling the truth? Nia said finally. I think, Mara said carefully, that he is telling the truth about that specific thing. Whether it matters is a different question. It doesn't change anything, Nia said. No. It doesn't undo any of it. No, Mara said. It doesn't. Another silence. Tell him I heard it, Nia said. Don't tell him anything else. Understood. Nia ended the call. She sat in the pale Copenhagen apartment at nearly midnight, the canal outside black and still, the crack in the plaster wall visible in the lamplight, and she pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed. In, out. The deal was done. The files were secured. The people who had helped her were no longer inside Jaewon's architecture. And somewhere in Seoul, in a house covered floor to ceiling with evidence of everything he had destroyed, Kwon Tae-jun was sitting with what he had built and what he had lost, and the specific silence of a man who had arrived, finally and too late, at a correct understanding of his own accounting. Nia looked at her hands. She was shaking, not from fear. The fear had been metabolized somewhere in the past 24 hours of phone calls and decisions, and the particular violence of having to trust, one final time, the instincts of a man who had spent years making her distrust them. She was shaking because the thing was done, because the war she had been fighting, the one she had walked into the moment she sat down on that kitchen floor and decided to get back up, had reached its final engagement, and she had survived it, and her hands were only now receiving the information that it was safe to stop being steady. She let them shake. She didn't try to stop it. Outside, a boat moved slowly along the canal, its navigation light a red point in the dark water, moving steadily through the city without urgency, going somewhere it was going regardless of everything that had happened in Seoul tonight. Nia watched it until it passed out of sight. Then she pressed her hands flat on the table, steadied them by force of will for the last time, and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. She wrote 2 words at the top, settlement terms. And below that she began, in her small, precise, slightly forward-leaning handwriting, the document that would close the last door on 8 years of a life she had fought for and lost and survived. She worked until 2 in the morning. She did not stop once. The settlement document Nia wrote that night in Copenhagen was 11 pages long. She finished it at 2:17 in the morning, set the pen down, and read it through once from the beginning without stopping to revise. Then she photographed each page with her phone and sent it to Mara's secure email with a single line. Review and formalize. No changes to core terms. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep well. She did not expect to. She lay on her back in the dark apartment and listened to the canal outside. The occasional passing of a night boat, the water moving against the stone embankment, the particular silence of a European city at 3 in the morning that is different from Seoul's silence in ways she couldn't fully articulate but felt in her chest. And she let her mind move through the past 72 hours without trying to organize them into a narrative. She was not ready for a narrative yet. What she had was a series of facts, arranged in order, each one carrying its own weight without needing to be connected to a meaning. She had been betrayed by her husband. She had prepared her own exit. She had been used by a man she had never met to advance an operation she had no knowledge of. She had called the husband who betrayed her to warn him about the operation she hadn't known she was inside. The operation had been neutralized. The divorce was proceeding on her terms. She was lying in a Copenhagen apartment at 3 in the morning, shaking stopped, hands still, breathing managed, alive. She closed her eyes. At some point before dawn, without deciding to, she slept. Mara called at 9 the next morning with revisions. Minor, structural, the kind that turned Nia's handwritten intentions into language that would hold up under Korean family court scrutiny. They worked through the document on the phone for an hour and 20 minutes, Nia at the kitchen table with coffee that she this time remembered to drink, Mara in her office with the revised draft open on 2 screens. When they finished, Mara said, "I need to tell you something about the formal proceedings." "Tell me." Tae-jun has retained new counsel. Not the Kwon family attorneys, but a separate firm, Seoul-based, known for clean settlements with minimal litigation. The instruction to them is to cooperate fully. Nia absorbed this. "He's not going to fight," she said. "He's not going to fight," Mara confirmed. "Does that change our timeline?" "It accelerates it. If his new counsel cooperates on disclosure, we could have a preliminary settlement conference within 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Nia turned her coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. "There's something else," Mara said. "There's always something else," Nia said, but without heat. "Sarah contacted my office this morning, through her own attorney. A pause. She wants to speak with you. Nia stopped turning the cup. What does she want to say? Her attorney described it as a personal communication, not legal. She said Sarah believes she owes you something that can't be handled through filings. Nia looked at the canal through the window. A cyclist passed on the far bank, moving steadily through the gray morning. Tell her attorney I'll consider it, Nia said. After the preliminary conference. I'll relay that. They ended the call. Nia finished her coffee. She put on her coat and walked to the studio. Well, the restoration work steadied her the way it always had, not by distracting her from what was happening, but by demanding a quality of attention that left no room for the non-specific anxiety that could otherwise expand to fill whatever space was available. The Dutch landscape panel required 3 more days of examination before she could begin any active treatment. She spent those days under magnification, mapping the damage, the water infiltration patterns, the areas where the paint layer had lifted from the ground, the sections where discoloration had altered the original tonal relationships beyond what cleaning alone could address. She made notes. She made more notes. She drew diagrams of the damage patterns on graph paper and pencil, the way she had been trained, because the act of drawing forced her to look more carefully than photography allowed. On the 4th day, she began. Her Danish colleague at the studio, a tall, quiet man named Henrik, who had been working in conservation for 30 years and communicated primarily through small, precise gestures and occasional single-sentence observations, watched her work for the first 2 hours without speaking. Then he came and stood beside her and looked at the section she had begun treating. "You're comfortable with the consolidant choice?" he asked. "I tested 4 options," she said. "This one has the most reversible long-term profile for the wood type." He nodded once and went back to his own table. That was the most they spoke for the rest of the week. She found this deeply, unexpectedly comforting. The preliminary settlement conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Seoul, 5 weeks after the night Nia had written the 11-page document at her kitchen table. She flew back on the Sunday before, alone, in an economy seat she had booked herself because Mara had offered to arrange business class, and Nia had declined without being entirely sure why, except that it felt important to arrive the way she had left, without the apparatus of the Kwon name or its resources cushioning the experience. Seoul hit her differently than she expected. She had braced for grief, for the specific bodily recognition of a place that contained the architecture of the best and worst years of her life. What she felt instead, walking through Incheon Airport, was something closer to the feeling of returning to a damaged painting after a period away. A clearer eye, distance having done what time alone does when you let it. She could see the shape of the thing more accurately now. Mara had arranged a hotel in Itaewon, neutral ground, not the Hanam-dong area, not anything connected to the Kwon geography. Nia checked in, ate a meal she barely tasted, and slept for 9 hours without dreaming. Monday she spent with Mara, reviewing the final terms, walking through every provision, identifying the 2 points where she anticipated Tae-jun's new counsel might attempt language adjustments, and deciding in advance how far she would move on each. On neither of them would she move far. "You're ready," Mara said at the end of the Monday session. "I've been ready," Nia said. "I've been ready since the night I packed the suitcases." Mara looked at her, a long, direct look, the look of a woman who had been close enough to this situation to understand its full weight. "How are you?" she said. And the way she said it indicated she was not asking about the legal preparation. Nia considered the question with the same honesty she had been trying to apply to everything since Copenhagen. "I'm not where I was," she said. "I'm not where I'm going to be. I'm somewhere in between, which I think is probably the correct place to be right now." Mara nodded slowly. "That's a better answer than most people give at this stage," she said. "Most people haven't had 5 weeks of Dutch landscape panels to think it through," Nia said. Mara almost smiled. The conference room was on the 9th floor of the building, housing Tae-jun's new council, deliberately not the Kwon family's usual legal geography, which Nia noted and understood as a signal about the posture his team had been instructed to take. She arrived 4 minutes early with Mara and Mara's associate. Tae-jun arrived 2 minutes later with his lead attorney and a junior associate who appeared to be there primarily to manage documents. He was thinner than she remembered, which was not something she had expected to notice first. He had lost weight in the way people lose weight when they have been operating under sustained pressure without attention to basic maintenance. The face slightly drawn, the suit fitting differently across the shoulders. He had shaved cleanly, and his posture was correct, and he looked, she thought, like a man who had spent 5 weeks not sleeping well, and had made a professional decision to present as though he had. He looked at her when he walked in. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. They sat on opposite sides of the table, and the attorneys introduced themselves to each other, and the conference began. It lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. In those 4 hours and 11 minutes, every financial provision Nia had drafted at her kitchen table in Copenhagen was reviewed, adjusted in language but not in substance, and provisionally agreed upon. The sole property she had brought into the marriage, an apartment in Mapogu she had purchased before the wedding with her own savings, was returned to her free of any Kwon encumbrance. Her personal artwork, including the paintings she had made after losing her pregnancies, was formally designated her sole property. A financial reimbursement, calculated against the documented misuse of marital funds to support Sera's lifestyle, was agreed upon without the negotiation Nia had prepared for. Tae-jun's counsel raised objections on 2 points, both minor, both resolved within 20 minutes. He did not speak during the conference. That was not unusual. Lead attorneys conducted these proceedings. But Nia was aware of his presence with the specific heightened awareness she had developed over 8 years of living alongside someone. The awareness that persists even after the emotional register has changed. At the end of the 4 hours, when the provisional agreement had been summarized and the path to finalization outlined, everyone stood and began gathering documents. Nia was capping her pen when she heard him speak for the first time. "Can I have a minute?" he said. Not to the room. To her. Directed, quiet. The specific register of a private request made in a professional setting. Mara looked at Nia. Nia looked at him. 5 minutes, she said. Here, with Mara present. He nodded. The other attorneys stepped to the far end of the room and made themselves occupied with papers. Tae-jun sat back down. Nia remained standing because she had not decided yet whether this conversation required the vulnerability of sitting. He looked at his hands on the table for a moment, then looked up at her. "I'm not going to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I know what I did, and I know what it cost, and I'm not going to insult you by making this about what I need from you." She said nothing. "I want you to know about the nursery," he said. Something tightened in her chest. "The photographs you left on the wall," he said. "The message. I went in there the night I found everything. I sat in that room for a long time." She waited. "The children we lost," he said. "I need you to know that I understood what you were saying with that message, that I never didn't understand it, that the room was never empty for me either." His voice on the last sentence was very controlled and very quiet, and cost him something visible. Nia looked at him. She thought about the Saturday they had painted the nursery together, his dress shirt ruined with pale yellow, the small Bluetooth speaker, the R&B playlist, the way he had moved the roller in long, even strokes, and hadn't said anything about the miscarriages but had stayed beside her for the entire day without being asked. She thought about how she had believed on that day that surviving something together meant something lasting. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Then why—" he started. "Because knowing something and choosing it are different things," she said. "You knew what we had. You chose something else anyway, for 18 months, across 1,000 small decisions, every single one of which you made voluntarily." His jaw moved. "I know that," he said. "Then you understand why I'm not standing here telling you it's all right," she said. "Because it isn't. It wasn't. And saying otherwise would be the same lie you spent 2 years telling me." He looked down at his hands again. "Yes," he said. The room was very quiet. "The settlement," he said. "What I offered. All of it. It's not payment. I want you to know that. It's not me buying your silence or your accommodation. It's—" He paused, searching for language that fit. "It's returning what was yours." "I know," she said again. And she did. She had understood what the offer meant when Mara delivered it, and she had accepted it on the terms she understood it to be, not the terms that would have been most convenient to believe. She picked up her document folder from the table. "I hope the child is healthy," she said. "I mean that. The child didn't make anyone's choices." He looked at her with an expression she had no clean category for. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. She walked to where Mara was standing, and they left the conference room together. In the elevator going down, Mara said nothing. In the lobby, Nia stopped walking for a moment and stood very still in the center of the open space, people moving around her, the building's air system humming above her, Seoul going on outside the glass doors. Then she started walking again. But Sira's request to meet came through the following morning. Nia had been planning to fly back to Copenhagen that afternoon. She looked at Mara's forwarded message for a long time before responding. She agreed to 20 minutes. They met in a cafe in Apgujeong that Nia had never been to. Sarah's suggestion, deliberately on neutral ground, which Nia noted as an indication that Sarah had thought about this more carefully than the request had implied. Sarah was already there when Nia arrived, seated at a corner table, visibly pregnant now at nearly 6 months, her coat open over a dark dress. She stood when Nia entered, which was a gesture Nia hadn't expected and which she registered without commenting on. They sat. A server came and they both ordered tea without looking at the menu, the small synchronicity of two women who both needed something to do with their hands. Sarah looked at her directly. She was, Nia noticed, more tired than she appeared at a distance. The careful assembly of her appearance showing its effort up close, something around the eyes that indicated a sustained period of inadequate sleep and sustained anxiety. "I'm not here to explain myself," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, and she had clearly prepared for this conversation. "I know there's nothing I could explain that would matter." "All right," Nia said. "I want to tell you 2 things," Sarah said. "The first is that I knew you existed, obviously, but I want to say that clearly, out loud to your face. I knew you were his wife. I knew exactly what I was participating in, and I participated anyway because I wanted what I wanted, and I told myself the story that people tell themselves in that situation." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you I regret it because of what it cost you. That would be dishonest. I regret what I did to you because it was wrong. Those are different statements." Nia looked at her. "The second thing," Sarah said. "Jaewon, what he asked me to do. I want you to know that when he approached me, he told me it was insurance for the baby. That I needed protection because a woman in my position had no legal standing and no security." She stopped. "He was right about the vulnerability. He wasn't telling me the truth about his reasons, and I was too," she looked for the word, "too focused on what I was gaining to examine why someone would offer me protection for free." The tea arrived. Neither of them touched it. "I stored those files," Sarah said. "I accessed things I had no right to access. I put your attorney and your investigator in danger, indirectly, without knowing it. I want you to know that I understand that." Nia looked at this woman across the table. She looked at her carefully, the way she looked at damaged paintings. Not with judgment about the damage, but trying to understand what the work had been before and what had happened to alter it. Sarah was not a villain, she decided. She was something more ordinary and more tragic than that. A woman who had wanted things badly enough to make choices she hadn't fully examined, and who was now living inside the consequences of those choices, with a child coming and a man who had been stripped of half his organizational authority and a family structure that had closed around her with considerably less warmth than she had been promised. "I heard you," Nia said. Sarah looked at her. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine," Nia said, "for the same reason I didn't tell him that yesterday. But I heard what you said." Sarah looked down at the table for a moment. "The baby," she said quietly. Do you want—" "No," Nia said, not harshly, just clearly. "I don't need information about the baby. I meant what I said to Tae-jun. The child didn't make anyone's choices. Beyond that, it isn't my life." Sarah nodded. They sat for another few minutes without speaking. Not comfortably, but not with active hostility either. 2 women at a corner table in Apgujeong with cups of cooling tea, occupying the strange, borderless space that exists between people who have been shaped by the same catastrophe from different angles. Nia left first. On the street outside, the late autumn air was cold and clear, the kind of Seoul day that arrived occasionally in November. The sky a specific hard blue, the light cutting and clean. She stood on the pavement for a moment and turned her face up toward that light. Then she walked to where Mara's car was waiting. She flew back to Copenhagen that evening. The flight was 9 hours, and she slept for 4 of them and spent the remaining 5 hours doing something she rarely allowed herself. Not working, not planning, not reviewing, just sitting with the window shade up and watching the darkness outside the aircraft and letting herself exist in the specific temporary suspension of long-haul flight, where the normal accounting of time and responsibility is briefly and legitimately interrupted. She thought about Tae-jun's face when he had said the room was never empty for me either. She thought about the fact that she believed him. She thought about the distance between a true thing and a thing that changes anything, and the importance of understanding that those two categories are not the same and do not need to be made the same in order for the true thing to remain true. He had meant it. It didn't fix anything. Both things were real. She looked out the window at the dark. She thought about the Dutch landscape panel waiting in the studio. The lower third still in early treatment stages, the original colors beginning to emerge where she had been working, the painting slowly returning to something that honored what it had been without pretending the damage had never happened. She thought about the word restoration and what it had meant to her at 22 when she chose it as her life's work, and what it meant now, and whether those meanings were compatible or whether she had simply grown into a more complex understanding of the same essential truth. Restoration doesn't mean returning something to a state before the damage. It means preventing the damage from controlling what remains. She had said that to Tae-jun in a different life, on the night they met, about a 17th century scroll. She had needed 8 years and a comprehensive personal catastrophe to understand she had been talking about herself. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after the preliminary conference, on a Thursday morning that was notable for no reason except that it was the day the legal machinery concluded its work on 8 years of a life. Mara called with the confirmation at 11 in the morning, Copenhagen time. Nia was in the studio. She was at a stage of the panel treatment that required her to stop what she was doing and listen properly, so she set down her tools and walked to the far end of the work table and stood near the north-facing windows with the phone to her ear. "It's done," Mara said. "Okay," Nia said. A pause. "How do you feel?" Mara asked. Nia looked out the studio windows at the street below. Gray. November morning, a few people on the pavement, a dog pulling a leash toward something interesting near a lamppost. An ordinary Tuesday, except it was Thursday, except this particular Thursday contained the formal end of the largest thing in her adult life. "I feel like I want to finish treating this painting," she said. Mara laughed, a real laugh, unexpected, brief. "Okay," she said. "Go do that." "Mara," Nia said, "thank you for everything. Not just the legal work." A pause. "It was important work," Mara said quietly. "You made it important." They ended the call. Nia stood at the window for another minute. Then she walked back to the panel and picked up her tools and went back to work. The months that followed were not triumphant. That was the part that nobody prepared you for. That surviving the worst thing didn't deliver you into a waiting landscape of peace and restored purpose. It delivered you into ordinary time, which had to be rebuilt the same way the painting did. Slowly, without rushing the process, accepting that each stage created the conditions for the next one rather than resolving everything at once. She worked, she slept, she ate, inconsistently. She called her mother in Chicago every Sunday morning and talked for an hour and said less than her mother would have liked, but more than she had said in the final years of her marriage, which her mother recognized and did not comment on directly. She made friends slowly, in the way of someone who has been reminded of the cost of misplaced trust and is applying more care than she once did. Henrik, her quiet Danish colleague, turned out to be capable of significant warmth when it was invited, which it took her until March to do. A woman named Ada Eze, a Nigerian-British textile conservator doing a residency at the same studio, arrived in February and within 3 weeks had become the kind of friend made in very specific life stages. Not a replacement for the friendships Nia had let go thin over the years of the Kwon marriage, but something new, built on the version of herself she was becoming, rather than the version she had been. She called Min-kyu in March to ask how things stood with Chae-won. He told her Jae-won had been relocated to Jeju-do under the arrangement Tae-jun had described: property, restricted communication, Kwon family oversight of his finances. Whether it would hold long-term was, Min-kyu said with his characteristic precision, a question about whether Chae-won's self-preservation instinct was stronger than his resentment. "What do you think?" Nia asked. "I think resentment is a fuel that burns out faster than people expect," he said. especially when the alternative is losing the property. And Tae-jun? A pause. He's rebuilding, Min-kyu said. Slowly. Day 6 audit is finished. He kept his position. He's operating with significantly more oversight than before. And Sarah? The baby was born in January. A girl. A pause. They're not married. Nia absorbed this. She's still in Seoul? Separate rents. Tae-jun provides for the child. He's, Min-kyu chose the word carefully, present, more than I expected. Nia thought about this. She thought about Tae-jun sitting in the Hanam-dong nursery alone on the night he found everything on the walls. She thought about what it must have cost a man like that to sit in that room. In the room she had painted pale yellow with him on a Saturday in year 2 of their marriage. And look at what he had made of the life they had built there. She hoped the child was healthy. She had meant that. Spring arrived in Copenhagen with the specific, almost aggressive beauty of northern springs, the city going from monochrome to saturated green and yellow in what felt like a single week, the canals reflecting new light differently than they had in November, cyclists multiplying overnight, cafe chairs appearing on pavements as if spontaneously generated by the improved temperature. Nia finished the Dutch landscape panel on the second Tuesday of April. She stood back from it and looked at it for a long time, Henrik beside her, both of them doing the final assessment. The lower third, the section most consumed by water damage when she had first encountered it, was fully treated. The original tonal relationships restored without overpainting. The artist's actual choices now visible again, rather than obscured by what time and water had done to them. It was not perfect. There were areas where the damage had been too complete for full recovery, places where what she had done was the best available, not a return to some original ideal. Those areas were documented in her conservation report, noted honestly for whoever encountered the work next. But it was right. It was what the painting could be, given everything that had happened to it. Henrik looked at it for a minute longer. Good work, he said, which from Henrik was, she had learned, the equivalent of a standing ovation. She went home. She made dinner, actually cooked, something she had been doing more often since March, rediscovering the specific domestic satisfaction of feeding herself properly. She ate at the kitchen table with the window open, the spring evening coming through, the canal sounds drifting up, water and bicycle bells, and someone far off laughing at something. After dinner, she sat with a glass of wine. She barely drank and looked at the wall of the apartment. She had put up one photograph. Not a reproduction, not a print, an actual photograph, a small one in a simple frame that she had developed from her phone after arriving in Copenhagen in November. It was the shot she had taken through the rear window of the car on the afternoon she left Seoul. The Hanam-dong mansion behind the gate, pale stone, enormous, growing smaller in the distance as the car moved away. The afternoon light on the facade. The gate already partially out of frame. She looked at it for a long time. The first time she had looked at this image, really looked at it, on the small screen of her phone in the Copenhagen apartment on her second day, she had seen it as evidence of what she had survived. The house receding, the distance increasing, the before and after. Now, 5 months later, sitting at the kitchen table with the spring evening coming through the window, she saw something different. She saw a woman in the back of a car who did not know yet what the next 5 months would cost her, who did not know about Chaewon or Daisik or the 11-page document she would write at 2 in the morning, or the conference room on the 9th floor, or the cafe in Apgujeong, who did not know that the war she believed she had finished was not finished, and that finishing it would require her to trust one more time the instincts she had spent the entire marriage trying to hold on to against the pressure of Tae-jun's world. She saw a woman who had made an enormous number of mistakes inside a marriage, who had stayed too long, who had chosen optimism over clarity on too many occasions, who had confused surviving pain with understanding its source, and who was also, in this precise image, in the act of making the only correct choice available. She was leaving. She was looking back once, because refusing to look back would have been its own kind of lie. And she was still moving forward. Nia set her wine glass down. She thought about what it meant to restore something. The Dutch panel. The Joseon scroll in the Insadong gallery, 8 years ago, when a man in a black suit had asked her the wrong question, and she had given him the right answer, and neither of them had understood yet what they were beginning. Is it better to preserve something broken, or repair it so completely that you can't tell it was ever damaged? She had told him it was the wrong question. The goal was always to understand what the damage had done to the structural integrity of what remained before deciding what to do next. She understood now, sitting in a Copenhagen apartment in April with the canal audible through the open window, that she had been applying that principle to the wrong subject for 8 years. She had been trying to restore the marriage. She should have been attending to herself. A year after leaving Seoul, Nia opened her own conservation practice. Small, 1 room, 1 assistant, a specific focus on private commissions. Families who had inherited damaged portraits and wanted them stabilized. Community organizations with deteriorating works they couldn't afford institutional rates for. One small municipal gallery in a Copenhagen neighborhood whose collection had suffered water damage from a burst pipe. She was not famous. She was not wealthy. Comfortable, which was both different and sufficient. She was gradually known for a quality of work that other conservators in the city recognized and occasionally referred clients to, which was a professional currency she valued more than most other kinds. One afternoon in the following October, a family brought her a damaged portrait of a woman, 19th century, Scandinavian, the face partially obscured by mold growth and paint loss from a century of improper storage. The family had no documentation of who the woman was. No name, no date, no provenance. Just a face in a damaged painting that someone, at some point, had cared enough about to commission and preserve for 100 years before circumstances allowed the damage to accumulate. Nia spent 2 weeks treating the portrait. When it was done, the woman in the painting looked back from the canvas with clear, direct eyes. Not reconstructed, not invented, but uncovered. Restored from the damage that had obscured her. She still had no name. She never would. But she was visible again. The family hung her in their hallway and sent Nia a note that said simply, "We can see her now." Nia read the note at her workbench. She folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to keep. She went back to work. She did not talk about Tae-jun often. Occasionally, with Adayez, in the specific way of people who have been through equivalent-sized catastrophes and understand each other's shorthand, she said enough that the shape of it was clear. The marriage, the betrayal, the departure, the war she had walked into not knowing its full dimensions. Adayez had her own version of a different story, and they held each other's versions with the care of people who understood that the story didn't need to be fully explained to be fully held. She did not date in the first year. In the second year, she had dinner twice with a Danish architect who was thoughtful and funny and genuinely kind, and both times she came home to the apartment and sat with the quietness of her own company and found she was not ready, and she told him honestly rather than avoiding the conversation, and he received this with a grace that she thought well of him for. In the third year, she allowed something to begin slowly and carefully with a man she met through Henrik, a Ghanaian-Danish museum curator named Kwame, patient and attentive and entirely uninterested in performing security in the way that men who are actually insecure perform it. He moved at her pace, which was slow, and did not mistake her care for unavailability. She did not compare him to Tae-jun. She had decided not to do that to either of them. The paintings she had made after her miscarriages, 9 canvases in pale yellow and gray, and the particular muted green she had mixed on the Saturday she and Tae-jun had painted the nursery, eventually found their place. She had kept them in storage in Seoul, in the Mapogu apartment that had been returned to her in the settlement. When she finally cleared the apartment 2 years after the divorce, she had them shipped to Copenhagen and sat with them for several days, arranging and rearranging them in the studio, looking at them with the same long, patient attention she applied to damaged work. They were not damaged. They were honest. They were paintings made from grief by a woman who had not yet understood the shape of her own grief, and they carried that honesty in every choice she had made without knowing why she was making it. She contacted a counseling center in Copenhagen that worked with families experiencing pregnancy loss and neonatal bereavement. She offered the paintings on extended loan. The center director, a quiet Danish woman named Brigitte, came to the studio to look at them. She stood before each one for a long time. "These are accurate," she said finally, which was not the word most people would have chosen, but which was the word Nia had been waiting for someone to use. "Yes," Nia said. "The families who come to us," Brigitte said, "they often struggle with the feeling that what they lost was invisible. that the world doesn't have room for grief that has no, she searched for the word, no established ceremony. I know that feeling, Nia said. Can we keep them permanently? Brigitte asked. Not alone, a gift to the center. Nia looked at the paintings. She thought about the nursery in the Hanam Dong mansion, the pale yellow walls, the message she had written and taped below the photograph. This room was never empty. Yes, she said, that's where they should be. She did not hear from Tae-jun after the divorce was finalized. This was by design, hers and his, an agreement implicit in the terms of the settlement and the manner in which it had been concluded. There was no ongoing connection, no children between them, no shared property, no professional entanglement that required continued contact. He existed. She knew he existed. He was living his life in Seoul, reorganized, constrained, moving through the consequences of what he had built. And she wished him, when she thought about it at all, the particular absence of ill will that is different from warmth but is still something. Not forgiveness as an event, not a moment when she decided to grant it, but the gradual recession of the heat of it, the way a wound stops being the first thing you notice about a body and becomes instead a scar, present, part of the record, not controlling the daily experience of being alive. She did not think about him every day after the first year. She thought about him sometimes, the version from early in their marriage, the man who had stayed beside her for an entire Saturday painting a pale yellow room, the man who had understood that silence was sometimes the only appropriate response to certain kinds of pain. That version had been real. She did not revise it out of the record in order to be able to hate him cleanly, because hatred that required dishonesty about the past was a different kind of trap, and she had been in enough traps. He had been real. What he had done was real. Both things were true. She held them both and moved forward. One morning in the 4th year, working alone in the studio before Henrik arrived, she realized that she had gone through the previous 7 days without thinking once about the Hanam Dong mansion. She noticed this only in the noticing of its absence. The mansion, the walls covered in photographs, the nursery with the pale yellow paint, and the message she had taped below the image of a man smiling at the evidence of his betrayal. For nearly 4 years, some version of that space had existed in the back of her mind. Not always in the front, not always consciously, but present the way a piece of furniture in a room is present even when you're not looking at it. And for 7 days, it had been gone. She stood in the studio with the morning light coming through the north-facing skylights, her tools laid out on the work table, a damaged 19th century watercolor waiting for her attention, the smell of ethanol and old paper and linseed in the air. She stood there for a minute. She was not triumphant. She was not, in this moment, anything as large as triumphant. She was simply a woman standing in a room she had made her own, in a city she had chosen, doing work she had always loved and now understood more completely than she had before everything happened. And she was breathing in and out without difficulty. And the canal was outside and the morning was ordinary, and she had, at some point in the past 7 days, without ceremony or decision, walked far enough from the wreckage that she could no longer see it from where she was standing. She picked up her tools. She looked at the damaged watercolor. She looked at it with the long, patient attention of someone who understood that the damage was not the whole story, that what was required was not speed or force, but a quality of presence, a willingness to stay with the difficult thing until it became clear what it needed, and then to give it that, steadily, without demanding that the process be faster or easier than it actually was. She began. The morning moved around her. Outside, Copenhagen went about the ordinary business of a city in early autumn. Water on the canal, cyclists, the smell of bread from somewhere nearby, the light coming through the windows at the angle that meant the season was changing again, that the year had turned again, that time was doing the only thing time does. Nia worked. Her hands were steady.